They've never met me in person before. They've only seen me on a screen, teaching them on a screen. And their first reaction was to come up to me and give me a hug. They felt safe enough to be able to do that.
Welcome back to Listen to the Helpers, a podcast created by the Fred Rogers Institute to elevate the voices of helpers everywhere. Fred Rogers once said, "When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, 'Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.'" Today, we're joined by Jessica Caraos, a member of our Educators Neighborhood program and a virtual kindergarten teacher in Wisconsin. At the end of this episode, stay tuned as Kenzie and I reflect on our discussion with Jessica in the context of Fred Rogers' legacy and our own work at the Fred Rogers Institute. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Listen to the Helpers. We're so glad to have you here, and I am especially excited for this episode because you are in my small group of educators. So I feel like I'm having like a proud moment here.
Aw.
But we'd love to start off if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're located, and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a 4K and 5K virtual teacher. I am from Wisconsin near the Milwaukee area. I am a dog mom. I take a lot of pride in being a dog mom to my dog Sully. I live with my husband here in Wisconsin. Um, I am also a practitioner in jujitsu, and I'm a kids jujitsu coach. And then also too, I am a, a, a daughter of immigrants, and that's something that I'm super proud of and take a lot of pride in. Take a lot of pride in what my parents have done for me to get me to where I am. Um, but overall, I like to tell people that I'm a jack of all trades. I am always finding new hobbies. I don't always stick with them, but I always love learning new things and being able to do new things. And I think that's part of why I became a teacher is I love learning and kind of wanted to share that love of learning with other people.
That's wonderful. And I love that you mentioned you're a kids jujitsu coach. That's such a fun, like, that's like another form of being an educator and a teacher for sure. But that's like an extra cool little fun fact about you. I love.
Yes, yes. I love my jujitsu kiddo. Shout out to Neutral Ground in Milwaukee. It's such a fun environment and it's a nice way to kind of unwind after a long day of teaching. But it also kind of brings me back to being able to work with kids in person because I don't get to do that in my virtual role. So,
Yeah, and so you being a virtual teacher, I know that, a lot of people, everybody listening probably is familiar with the idea of virtual teaching because of COVID, but
yeah.
that's very different from that time is very different from like your profession as an actual virtual teacher. So can you kind of walk us through like what does a typical school day look like for you as a virtual teacher for kids in virtual school? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the way my school works, at least, is I host classes live on Zoom with my kids every day. And we meet in about like 30-ish minute blocks for each of our subjects. And my schedule is a little bit staggered because I teach both 4K and 5K. And for those who don't know what 4K and 5K is, it's basically just 4-year-old kindergarten and 5-year-old kindergarten. So we do live classes every day, and then also too, the kids get lessons that they do at home with we call them their learning coaches. So they're adults at home. Um, and basically, the way I structure my lessons every day is I'll work on whatever the curriculum or the lesson for the day is that they would be doing at home with their parents or their learning coaches, their adults. Um, and then I just work on that with them. And it's super fun because every day is a little bit different. If you've ever worked with 4 and 5-year-olds, you know that they bring a lot of energy into whatever they do. And they always have new things to talk about and new things that they want to do. So it's super fun being able to work with them. I teach. in the mornings usually, and then usually in the afternoons, that's my time that I have for doing small groups with my kids or having meetings with other staff at my school. So every day is a little bit different depending on what my meetings look like and what I might be pulled into for that day.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And are the students that you work with, are they all in your like geographic region? Like are they in your like district or are they from different areas since you are a virtual school?
So all of my kids are in the state of Wisconsin, but they're all over the place. So I have some that, like in the past, lived like right in the town next to me. But then I also have friends in my class that are like all the way at the like tippy top of Wisconsin. And it's cool because everyone's from different areas, but at the same time, it also kind of sucks sometimes because some of my friends are so far, I don't always actually get to meet them in person. I've met a few of my friends or my kids. I always call my kids my friends. And when we're in class, I always say friends. But I've met a few of them in person a few times. And then there's also been other kids in my class too that I've never actually met in person, which kind of sucks because I'd love to see them and greet them in person.
No, this is such a fun conversation for me because I attended a cyber school. I graduated in 2019, and so
Okay.
the entirety of high school was cyber. So I did it before COVID. So when
Yeah.
I talked to you, I told Sarah beforehand, I'm like, oh my gosh, Jess is a cyber school teacher, and I get it. Like even the language you're using, like learning coach, like my mom was my learning coach, and the fact that you,
Yes.
oh my gosh, yeah, like we referred to her as my learning coach. So I like, and I totally get it. Like mine was like across Pennsylvania. I had friends in Harrisburg, in Philly, in Scranton, and I never got to meet them in person. And sometimes I did, like for my prom, I went all the way to Harrisburg. So
Okay.
I'm super exciting getting to talk.
And
Um,
it's nice to have someone that actually knows what it's like on the other side because I feel like a lot of people, Sarah, kind of like you said earlier, there's like a weird stigma that goes along with virtual schooling and virtual teaching, and it's nice to be able to meet someone that can actually connect and be on the other side of that education part.
Yeah, and like I mean, we're pretty far removed from COVID now. We're still feeling the effects.
Yeah.
But when we were deep in COVID, like I remember telling my classmates, like the way you look at cyber learning and virtual learning is not, it is, but it's not the kind of exact learning you receive in like a cyber school. Like, yes, we're over Zoom, but like it's just different. Like we were kind of thrown into a virtual setting with COVID. Like virtual education is so much different and the teachers are well versed and prepared and all of the tricks and tools like it's different like it I don't know if you felt the same way but it's different for sure.
I was when COVID first hit, I was still in college and um it came time to do my student teaching. It was for my last year. And I actually got matched up with the district's like designated virtual teacher. So at that point, it was in the second half of 2020, so that like August, September part of the school year, kids were starting to go back to the brick and mortar, the physical schools, but they still had one teacher on reserve for teaching virtual in case families didn't feel comfortable going back yet. And so I worked with her during my student teaching, and I was a virtual teacher during my student teaching, which was a little bit different of an experience. It's not what you expect when you're going to school for teaching kids and you don't expect to be teaching virtually in your last year of doing that I don't know, I don't remember what they call it, our practicum or like field experience. Um but then when I saw the opening for my school, I was like, hey, this is kind of perfect. I actually have a lot of experience in this. And Kenzie, you mentioned it nicely how when it's a set virtual environment and not just like, hey, let's throw this virtual class together so that the kids can go to school, it's a lot different. I had all of that experience under my belt, and it was, hey, we actually need to have lesson plans for the day. We need to plan for the entire week, plan for the entire month, and it's not just let's just show up on Zoom and try to figure something out. Um, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't know about virtual teaching is it still comes with everything that you have in a physical classroom. I had someone like a year or two ago ask me, they were like, "Hey, are you still doing that virtual thing?" And I wanted to be like, "You mean teaching?" Because it kind of just threw me off. It's like it's not just a virtual thing. I'm literally out here, teaching kids still. I'm still working on the same thing I would be working on in a physical or a brick and mortar classroom. Um, and yeah, I think a lot of people don't recognize that there's a difference between what we saw during COVID and what it looks like in a virtual school when it's, completely virtual. And this is what we've been doing for however long.
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of jump ahead a little bit, but I wanted to ask you because I got to see kind of what you do to engage your kids during the mid-year convening for Educators Neighborhood, and you
Oh.
have a lot of great practices. And I was just wondering, like, how do you keep students, especially young ones, like 4 and 5 year olds, so engaged in an online setting? Like, what are your tips, tricks? Like, what do you recommend? What do you do?
Yes, to be completely honest, it's always changing. And if I'm being even more honest, sometimes I don't even know how to keep them engaged. But I think the big thing for me is just going into it with a lot of energy and trying to match the energy of kids. They're 4, they're 5. Some of my kids are 6 years old, all in that age range. Um, but I think I just try to bring a lot of energy to them and keep it fast paced and upbeat. I like to add a lot of movement into my lessons and my classes every day. And I think sometimes my kids even get sick of it. They're like, we have to stand up again. And I think it helps keep them engaged. I'm always doing brain breaks with my kids. I'm always encouraging them to like stand up, stretch out if they need to. Um, I am a big fan of Mr. Jack Hartman. And he is like our class. I've heard a lot of people say this, so I don't want to say it, but I am going to. He's our class grandpa. He teaches us how to count. He teaches us like sounds. But with all of his videos, he's always doing a lot of movement. And I think that's just the big thing is at that age, especially, kids are wanting to move. They're wanting to like get up, move their bodies. So I try to do a lot of things in my class that require using like manipulatives or even just like writing on their whiteboard, to try to keep them as engaged as possible. I've had classes where I've like just like sat there and like tried to explain a certain topic or a certain lesson just through slides. And it never goes well because at some point they start like looking off to the side. Sometimes they'll have like siblings in the room and they'll like get distracted by their siblings. Like I've seen kids just like spinning around in their chairs and it's like, okay, well, I got to change it up to keep them engaged because if I don't do something, I'm going to lose them.
No, and I will say, like, again, you presented in front of a bunch of other educators for EN. Like, you also got us all up and moving, and a lot of it was fun. It was a very fun, like, Sarah, you should have been there. It was a great show.
Thank you,
But you have the
Kenzie.
recording, so that's good. Yeah, and I do have to say, when you were talking about your student teaching experience and like how you kind of chose that like intentional virtual learning path, I didn't realize how close in age we must be because I also did my student teaching in 2020. So
Oh.
we were like same thing, same time, but different, different parts of the country. So that's kind of cool to think about. But yeah, I did my student teaching in the spring of 2020. So it was like the first half was in person, all was, normal as it should have been. And then in the middle of my student teaching, that's when COVID hit. So I had to do the second half in a kindergarten classroom, all virtual, but it wasn't with like a virtual teacher like you had talked about your experience. It was the opposite of like what you let's take all of our in-person stuff and just try to do it over Zoom, not
Yes.
develop, intentional virtual lessons. So, I really appreciated hearing your experience around that. But speaking of our Educators Neighborhood program, we've mentioned a few times you are currently a member of our Educators Neighborhood, and I've had you in my small group this year, which has been so lovely, and we've had such wonderful conversations in that group. But I'm wondering if you can share, based on your time so far in Educators Neighborhood, is there anything in particular that stands out to you that you've learned either from Educators Neighborhood, like from the community, from those discussions, or just from Fred Rogers in general, that you've kind of implemented into your own practice or even into your own personal life?
Yeah. So first of all, shout out to the Educators Neighborhood and this entire cohort. I know the applications are out. So if anyone listening, if you're thinking about applying, please do because it's been such a great experience this year. But I think the biggest thing that I've taken from the Educators Neighborhood cohort this year is really loved meeting all of the different people that work in child-centered or student-centered or aligned roles. I think that's a super big thing is I've met so many different people, whether it's been from our small group or our whole group meetings or even our mid-year convening that we had that come from all different walks of life. But one thing that brings us together is that we all work with children in some capacity or have worked with children in some capacity. So everyone kind of has their own different viewpoints and ways that they've seen and worked with kids. And everyone kind of brings their own experience and beliefs to working with kids. And that's kind of helped me in the sense that I feel like sometimes I have like main character syndrome. I feel like that's like a term that like pops up a lot in like recent like social media, to where I think like, okay, this is what's happening in my life. And sometimes I think a lot of people can forget that there's so many different people out there who are all going through their own thing and doing their own thing. And it's easy to forget that kind of everyone has their own experiences in life. Um, so while I've really enjoyed all of our different conversations on, imagination and wonder and curiosity and play and all of those amazing things that we talk about in our small groups. I think the biggest thing for me is just recognizing that, hey, being a teacher isn't the only way that you work with children. And then in that similar matter, there's a lot of different things that people are out here doing and experiencing and living.
I appreciate that aspect of like the I mean, we call it Educators Neighborhood because it is a neighborhood. It's a community. We hope to like build that actual sense of community and that feeling of like I belong here and I'm not alone in what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing. And like there's so much more. Like I'm doing such great work and also so are these other people in so many different ways. So I'm really glad to hear that that's been your experience.
It is a comfort to often we have times where someone will bring something to a small group and be like, "Oh, th this is what I'm going through in Wisconsin." And then someone from like England will be like, "Oh yeah, same. This is what I did to combat that or, you know, work on that." So I agree totally with you, Sarah, as well.
Yeah, and our small group has been a great group of people. I think a lot of the people in our group specifically, I think just because of how the groups are set up, are all educators. But there's someone else in our group that's also a virtual educator. And the first time we met, I was like, wow, there's other virtual educators out there. Like it's just nice to be able to meet new people. And I think especially being in a virtual setting all the time, um, I think sometimes you can get a little bit isolated. I tell my husband all the time, sometimes I feel like I have like cabin fever, um, because I will go like a day or two without like interacting with like another adult because I will like be talking to my or like another adult in person. I will have like meetings with my coworkers and colleagues. But like besides that, I might not talk to another adult for the day. Um, Besides my husband, who like I get to see every day. So it's refreshing to be able to talk to other people when we are in our small groups and just hear what their experiences are and what they're going through in their classrooms and their work with kids. Um, because I don't always get to have that opportunity.
No, that totally makes sense, and I totally get that. And just kind of looking at this idea of relationships, I feel like a lot of people, at least in my experience, 6 years ago, 7 years ago when I graduated, a lot of people argued that for like a virtual setting that there's like kind of like a lack of connection there because it is on a virtual, not physically in person. So like for you, how do you prioritize like connections with people on an online setting?
I think a big thing for me is just building trust and really working on building that relationship with my kids. And I feel like I try, and this is something I feel like a lot of teachers say to never do if you want a successful classroom, is to not be the nice teacher when you start off the school year. I feel like something I've heard a lot is don't start off nice, start off kind of strict and a little bit harder so that they take you seriously and they don't think they can like get away with things. But I feel like I take an entirely different approach when I'm working with my kids is from the beginning, I try to be someone that they can trust and someone that they can be silly around. And sometimes it might backfire at me because sometimes they'll be really silly and it's a little hard to get them back, like back doing what they're supposed to be doing. Um, Recently, my kids have like gotten into this little prank or like habit where they try to like scare me when they come into my Zoom meeting. They'll like hide like so that I can't see them. And like I can see like the top of their head. So like I know that they're there. But then I will be like, oh, where is so and so? Or I wonder where like blank is. And then they'll like pop up and like pretend to scare me. And that will go on for like 2 or 3 minutes in the beginning of our class. But at this and sometimes I'm like, okay, guys, let's get started with class. I know you guys are there. But at the same time, I love that they feel comfortable enough to be doing silly things like that around me. Um, our school we're lucky enough to plan field trips around like all over the state so that our kids from all over are able to come and see their classmates, come and see their teachers. Um, and I think a really big indicator that I was doing something right, I don't know what it is, but something was right, was when I went to a field trip and it was the first time that the student had seen me in person and they just came up to me and gave me a hug. And it made me feel good that they're comfortable enough with me to where they've never met me in person before. They've only seen me on a screen, teaching them on a screen, and their first reaction was to come up to me and give me a hug. They felt safe enough to be able to do that. Um, so I think just being silly with them is a big thing that I like to do, and being a kid with them. It's um, a big philosophy, I'd say, of my education. And it's a Fred Rogers quote that I feel like a lot of people know is you were a child once too. And I think that goes into a big part of my teaching is just I'm a kid at heart, and I feel like I am always going to be a kid at heart. And I think the way I get to my students is just acting like a kid with them and having fun with them. And I think because of that, they're like, okay, she's kind of cool, you know?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up that Fred quote and just Fred in general, because I was going to ask you, our podcast is called Listen to the Helpers, and I'm curious to know, what do you think it means to be a helper?
Um, I think it means kind of going back to what I said about being a safe spot or being a safe person. and being someone that, others can come to if they're, struggling with something or even not struggling with something. Um, to be a helper, there doesn't always have to be a situation where someone needs help. I think being a helper is just being someone that helps empower other people, whether it's they're in a good time or whether they're in a bad time. But then also being just a safe spot, like a listening ear for those people. Like I said, whether it's a good time or a bad time. Um, and then I think another big thing about being a helper is just not trying to rescue someone, but to empower them. I love to give random compliments out to people. I am the type of person that will be like, "Oh, I love your skirt," or "I love your blouse," or like, "Hey, you look really nice today." And my husband's always just like, "That was so random. Like, you don't even know that person." Um, but it's like if there's anything that I can do to bring even a little bit of joy to someone else's day, I want to take that because it doesn't cost me anything to tell someone that I, really like what they're doing that day. Like it doesn't take too much to just brighten up someone else's day. And I try to live by that philosophy, whether that's giving someone a compliment or just helping something out at, the grocery store. I saw like a lady. I was at the store the other day, and there was a lady who is also a helper. She noticed all these carts in the parking lot, and she was dragging like five different carts along with her, and she had like this whole train. And it was just like, okay, well, all these other people are walking past her. It's literally not going to cost me anything to grab a few of the carts and help her out. Um, I think that's a big thing about being a helper is just noticing when there might be someone in need and doing your part to help. I think that's what Fred was talking about is there's always going to be a helper, whether it's a good situation, a bad situation, but you just have to look out for them and they'll be there.
I love that answer. And I love that you talked about, that idea of being a safe space. It seems like from your story about like the field trip where the student came up and gave you a hug and you talking about like the students being silly with you over your, virtual classes. It seems like you are doing a really good job at creating that safe space and being that helper to those students. And I love that answer of like not being there to just like rescue somebody, but just like doing your part and feeling that kind of responsibility to each other and just as humans. Um,
Yes.
so I love thinking about it like that. I want to ask you, do you have a story of a time that you remembered your why of like, oh, this is why I do what I do in terms of like teaching in general or just working with kids? Maybe it's about, your virtual teaching, or maybe it's about your jujitsu coaching, or maybe it's, it's something totally different, but just a time that you remembered your why. Do you have something that comes to mind?
Um, this is another like hug story. So, I live near a park. And one day, my husband, my dog, and I were just walking along the park, and all of a sudden, I heard someone scream, "Mrs. Caraos!" And I like looked around, and I just saw like a child running at me full speed. And like she finally got to me and just like didn't even say anything, but just like ran up, gave me a hug. And I think that was one time that I remembered my why is I am here to help kids, help them feel safe, help them feel comfortable. And just like that story where, I met the kid for the first time at the field trip, this was when I was back teaching in like a brick and mortar school. I used to teach in a physical school before I transitioned to my virtual school. But this was one of my students from my old school. Um, and I think it was just one of those times where it's like, this is a child whose life I've made enough impact on to where they saw me and immediately wanted to approach me. I grew up with a lot of amazing teachers. I was very privileged to go to a lot of great schools and had a lot of teachers who, modeled what it's like to be a great teacher. But I feel like as a kid, when I saw my teachers in public, I like never wanted to like say hi to them. I would like hide behind like the aisles of the grocery store so that they wouldn't see me. And like I said, I grew up with really great teachers. I loved all of my teachers growing up, but I feel like there was never any sort of special connection that I had with any of my teachers to where my first reaction when I saw them like out in public would be to like scream out their name and to like charge at them and give them a hug. So I think that was a really big, moment in my life to where I was just like, I think I made a great choice becoming a teacher. Um, and then another kind of just, I don't know if it's one moment or just a lot of moments, is I mentioned earlier how I love doing a lot of movement with my kids. I love doing a lot of brain breaks. My class is a really big fan of the Danny Go brain breaks and all of his like movement activities. And every once in a while when we're doing them, I find myself really getting into them. I'm like, ducking. I'm pretending to like run away from the sharks and like hopping on my chair to like avoid the lava that's on the floor. And I can like see my kids just having so much fun. And I'm like right along like with them having as much fun like running away from these sharks or like the ice penguins or the monsters or whatever. And in those moments is when I realized like this is why I became a teacher because I am also a kid at heart. I love to have fun and just seeing the joy on their faces and also knowing that I'm having fun alongside them is a really, really big thing of what I love about teaching.
Right. And they're gonna remember that silliness.
I hope
That
so.
is so fun. Like I and Danny Co, like I'm not even my background's in secondary ed English and I've subbed for like kindergarten before and the dinosaur one sticks into my brain, like all of the dinosaur names he does. So I'm really glad you mentioned that because I was like, wait, why do I remember Danny Go? And I was like, oh my gosh, dinosaurs. Yes. And they really love Danny Go. Like
They do. Danny Go, Jack Hartman, Cuckoo Kangaroo, all of those, and I want to give credit to all of them. I do our exercise club at my school and basically we just meet. I try to have them like go through exercises just to like keep their bodies moving. And it's like the time and the work and all of the effort they must put into making those videos is insane because it's like I try to put together like one little like Google Slides, PowerPoint, and I'm like, this is hard and it like takes a lot of time. So yeah, shout out to all of those people who are out here creating the brain breaks and all of those fun movement activities for our kids.
yeah. And I wanted to say too, kind of tying back to the second hug story, also the confidence of the student too, because there's always that fear like, oh, do my teachers remember me? Like, is it like it sounds like they didn't even like hesitate and just went full running. And that like is amazing. And you should feel so good about yourself as an educator, which it sounds like you do because you should. Like that no, I absolutely love that. And unfortunately, I hate to like close our conversation, but I want to ask, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Um, I would say that if you're listening to this, just be a helper and you can do that by doing a lot of things really, whether that's like I said earlier, paying someone a compliment on something you like about them or helping someone out at the grocery store. It costs absolutely nothing to be kind and it costs absolutely nothing to help brighten someone's day a little bit. So whatever you can do to be a helper,
Mhm.
try to do it and take that time out of your day.
Those are wonderful thoughts to kind of close out this episode together. And it was thank you so much again for providing so much like context and insight into what being a virtual teacher looks like, how much intentionality goes into it, how much passion and heart you have for what you do. It's just you can feel how excited you are about being a teacher and being an educator just by hearing you talk about it. And
No,
you're very lucky to have you. So yeah,
thank you.
we are so lucky to have you as part of our educators neighborhood and as part of our, Fred Rogers Institute orbit. So, thank you again so much for being on this episode, and we're so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me, guys. Thank you for taking the time today to talk with me and let me share what it's like.
I know I said it multiple times, but I am so glad that we got to have her on the podcast because I do feel like a proud small group leader because she's doing such incredible things and not by any means because of her participation in Educators Neighborhood, but I'm just proud to have her in my small group and proud to bring her into this part of our work at the Institute because she is so amazing and she has such wonderful contributions to our small group in Educators Neighborhood. So I knew that this would be such a really insightful and wonderful and joyful conversation. But what did you think, Kenzie?
No, I really enjoyed getting to talk to Jess as well, just because we haven't had a virtual teacher on the podcast yet.
I feel like it was interesting to have her as a virtual teacher on the podcast, especially because, like you mentioned, you have a background in being a student at a virtual school or at a cyber school. So, not only was it exciting for us to hear about her work, but I'm sure that that was like extra exciting for you on a personal level too.
Yes, because like I said, like I feel like people's perceptions of virtual learning are so off balance just because of the trauma that is COVID-19 and what we had getting thrown into a virtual classroom and using, like you said, like curriculum and lessons based in person learning, really.
Yeah.
So getting to hear about how she engages with her students and all of the joys of movement and Danny Go and brain breaks are super important just because it happens to us. Sometimes we just got to get up and moving even when we are face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that she outlined like what the typical day looks like. And like you mentioned, like I'm glad that she talked about those movement aspects of what she tries to incorporate to keep those students engaged because she does work with such young children. They need that extra, extra movement, extra interactivity. But also because I feel like there is a misconception that with virtual school and virtual learning, it is just a kid staring at a screen all day long for like 8 hours. Because you think of school, you think like 7, 8 hours a day, and typically that's in a classroom. So they're moving from place to place. Maybe they have gym class and library and computer science or whatever. They're like going to different places doing different things. So when you think of virtual schooling, I think some people might have a misconception that it's that, but just on a screen, so that there's a 5-year-old sitting at a desk on a computer staring at a screen for 7 or 8 hours of the day, which, as we heard from Jessica, that is not by any means what it is. It's not taking the actual in-person school and putting it on a screen. It's learning in a different way and it's very intentionally designed to be in that different format. So it's yes, it's school and school, it's learning and learning, but it's not really comparing the same type of thing, you know?
And it was definitely interesting. Like, as you said, she teaches each subject in 30-minute chunks, and it sounds like most of it is in the morning, and then afternoon is small groups. But I feel like, at least for me personally, and again, granted, I was in high school when I did cyber school, but it really helped me prepare for college and the workforce because my like classes, I'd have history at like 9 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then I'd have math Tuesday, Thursday from like 1 to 1:50. Like it was really prepared, kind of like a college schedule was. And then I was able to like juggle like like classes and sitting in a classroom or a classroom and also doing my work outside of like my classes too. So like my ability to be responsible was really supported through my cyber school education, which I have a feeling will be the same case for justice students as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective on it, and that completely makes sense. And I hadn't thought about it like that either. So that totally makes sense that you have a lot more or a different I don't want to say a lot more. You have a different kind of responsibility for your own learning when you're in a cyber school setting and a virtual learning setting. So that's really interesting to be able to hear your perspective as like a former cyber school student. Um, Something else that you got really excited about during that conversation that I thought was so interesting because I had not heard this before was the idea of parents or caregivers or adults at home being referred to as learning coaches. I think that is such a cool phrase to use and such a again that you can tell how intentional that wording is to be specific to virtual learning because learning is out happening outside of what's going on the screen. It's happening on the screen and there's more beyond what's going on in those 30-minute increments with Jessica's class. So there's, responsibility on the student, but the parents and caregivers and adults at home have that extra responsibility too of being considered those learning coaches. Can you talk more about like your experience? Because you mentioned that that was familiar to you. Your mom was your learning coach. Can you talk more about your experience with that?
Yeah, I definitely can. And it's like making me like in my mind, like taking me back because what at least how it is for high school, um, I would work on my assignments. I'd have like an essay due, and my mom could go in like the website and they use it's called like Edio and like check my work and assure that I did the assignment and then check it off and then it would be sent away to my teacher to grade. So like it the system itself, people are like, oh, like how involved are parents? They are pretty involved. Like you are kept accountable. And I know my sister too. My niece and nephew are also cyber schooled. My niece is in second grade. My nephew's in seventh grade. She'll sit with them because she works afternoons, so she's able to sit with them on their Zoom calls and like help out my niece if she needs to grab like markers or so. Parents can get very involved, and it's very flexible as well. And I'm moving away from your original question because like there were times where I'd wake up and I wouldn't start school until like 2 o'clock, or like, oh, I'd go on like a fun like weekend trip with my parents and I'd do school and catch up when I missed on Friday. Like there are so many ways to participate in cyber school and you could be synchronous, so follow along with your teacher in a class, or asynchronous and work on your own. It's crazy what cyber school can do. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it makes me think about like, I wonder, I would love if we could have a future guest on our podcast to be a homeschool educator, because I wonder what the similarities and differences are between virtual educators and like cyber school educators and homeschool educators, because a lot of homeschool educators are parents homeschooling their own children or caregivers homeschooling their own children, but from my limited perspective of those areas, like it seems like there are actually a lot of similarities too, because, Jessica talked about how there are field trips across the state so that the kids in the virtual learning space can actually meet in person. You've talked about how your prom was in person, obviously, and you got to meet some people from your cyber school that you hadn't met in person before. And I know that there are, a lot of homeschooling communities that do similar things where they'll have like field trips or meetups or meet with kind of these like experts in the field kind of thing, um, so that it can be flexible and more experiential. And yeah, maybe that's like if anybody listening is a homeschooler or knows a homeschool educator, reach out to us and let us know, and we'd love to have you on the podcast and talk about what you do and how you do it and how it relates to this kind of work.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that because I was going to touch upon the same thing that I'm really glad Jess brought up those field trips because I feel like there's definitely like, misconceptions on socialization skills for cyber schoolers. And like there are field trips all across the state and they're usually free or they come at a low cost. Like I was able to go to a theater show in Pittsburgh for like $5 through my school.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. And like there's so many, they also offer clubs. Like Jess leads an
Yeah.
exercise club. I know my niece, she's in a Pokemon club and she plays Pokemon Go with people in like Philly. Like it's so inclusive and there's so many different types of clubs. And again, if a parent wants to start a club or has a suggestion, like I'm sure that they could do that as well. There are so many ways to socialize and you aren't missing out on those skills necessarily.
Yeah, I feel like especially since like you and I have backgrounds in education, like we are trained to be teachers and we obviously know the benefits of being in a a physical classroom space in a traditional classroom setting. But it's so like when I think about like from my perspective as a mom too, like obviously my son is not in school yet. He's still too little for that, but that's coming up in the next couple years here and it's kind of like overwhelming to think about in a good way. It's overwhelming in a good way because I think about how many good options there are. Like traditional classroom settings, great, fantastic for all of these reasons. And also virtual learning, cyber schools, so great for all of these different reasons. Homeschooling, great for all of these different reasons. Like there, and then even with like the traditional classroom settings, there's public schools, there's private schools, there's, faith-based schools. Like yeah, my husband went to public school all his life. I went to a private Catholic school all my life, and you went to cyber school, and I've heard your experiences. Like I've heard nothing but great experiences from all of these things. So it's kind of a good problem to have, I guess, that there are so many options for different types of learning.
Yeah, and it honestly, it makes me, speaking of our six fundamentals of learning and growing, kind of like curiosity. Like the parents can be a little curious and figure out what's best for their child.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the flexibility, like the structure of the flexibility, that allows for a lot of curiosity. I think about like with a virtual learning setting like yours and like Jessica's, where the students are not all from the same area. Yes, they're from the same state, but within one state, different areas are very different for a lot of different reasons. Like if you go from like Pittsburgh to Philadelphia, like those are two very different cities in one state. And thinking about like her students from all over Wisconsin, like related to that curiosity aspect, the students are learning from and with and about other people, other people's backgrounds, other people's beliefs and likes and dislikes, and what their, little like subculture is within their overall state, and kind of learning more about the world around them in a different way than they would in a physical school with people who live right in their same neighborhood, physical neighborhood. So I think that's a cool relation to curiosity too.
Yeah, and I think Jess also mentioned to trust, the trust between a child and their teacher. And you could just tell based off of the story she was telling that like her students trust her. Like my favorite story she told was the silly one where like sometimes like her students will join a Zoom call and they'll be like out of frame to like spook her.
I could like picture that as she was talking about it too.
And the fact that she like went down to her seat like
And I can imagine like a kindergartner being like, like this on the screen and being like, she has no idea where I am right now, and thinking that they're being so sneaky and her playing along. Like I can just picture it in my mind. And you're so right that that definitely relates to trust. And like she talked a lot about that idea of creating a safe space. Like clearly she is doing a great job of creating that safe space if they're comfortable doing that.
Yep.
Well, I think this was a wonderful conversation with Jessica. I had so much fun talking with her, as always. Um, Jessica mentioned we talked a lot about our Educators Neighborhood program. We will link some more information to Educators Neighborhood in the captions and descriptions of this episode so that anybody listening can learn more about the program if they're interested. And yeah, like I said, if you are a homeschool educator or you're teaching in another setting outside of a traditional classroom, let us know, reach out to us. We'd love to have you share your story on an episode in the future with us. And yeah, Kenzie, thanks for this awesome debrief, awesome episode, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Jess. The Fred Rogers Institute advances the legacy of Fred Rogers by investing in the strengths of families and caring adults to support the healthy development of children. To learn more about the Fred Rogers Institute and our initiatives, visit fredrogersinstitute.org and follow the Fred Rogers Institute on Instagram, Facebook, and X.